Hey everybody, so I've wanted to do this video for a while since the season ended, but just never got around to taking the time to put in the research to do it. But I want to take a look back and have a little fun here, looking at this past season, and look at what I think are the 10 biggest oofs of last season, things that just really did not go well for their respective teams. And it's kind of all different sorts of things. Some just team seasons in general, some things that specifically happened. But here are my picks for the 10 biggest oofs of last season. This will definitely make you want to type oof in the comment section and give an F in the chat for some of the people involved here. So let's get right into it. Number 10. At number 10, I have the Edmonton Oilers hiring Ken Holland as their GM. Obviously, when they announced that, I did a video on that explaining, my feelings on them hiring Holland. I still don't like them hiring Holland. This is the guy that ran the Detroit Red Wings into the ground and to the point where the Red Wings are now a rebuilding team. And now he's supposed to go and try and be the savior for Edmonton. I don't like that move at all. And yeah, so I think hiring Ken Holland is a big oof for the Edmonton Oilers. And I do not trust that he's going to be the guy that brings this team back into playoff contention. I just don't see it happening. Not with his style, not the way that he does things. We've seen it for the last couple years in Detroit now, where they haven't gotten any really much better. I don't think he's going to save Edmonton either. Number 9, Drew Doughty's plus minus. Drew Doughty was minus 34 last season. That is a big oof for somebody who thinks they're one of the best defensemen in the NHL. Doughty's making, $11 million per year. Now, the Kings were awful last year. I think we all know that. And playing on a bad team always really hurts your plus minus because the goal differential is so bad. And, other things go into plus minus other than that specific player's performance all the time. However, when you get extremes, in this case extremely bad, some of that absolutely belongs on the player. And Doughty finished last year with 8 goals, 37 assists for 45 points. Not too bad for a defenseman. But he was minus 34, and according to hockeyreference.com, he had 105 giveaways last year, which is the most he's ever had in a season in his career. So last year was a big oof for Drew Doughty. He was not very good. He was not one of the best defensemen. The Kings were absolutely horrible, and it was just a downright miserable season for LA and Drew Doughty last season. So his year is without a doubt a big oof, and his plus minus, I think, is the biggest oof. Minus 34. That is brutal. Sticking with the LA Kings, number 8 here is the LA Kings' entire season. The Kings were a playoff team 2 years ago. They lost to Vegas in the first round. They got swept out. But they were a playoff team. They were a team that going into last season was expecting to make the playoffs again. Last summer, they signed Ilya Kovalchuk in the offseason because goal scoring was a huge problem for them. They did not have enough offense. They thought bringing Kovalchuk in would give them, 25 to 30 more goals and help them out a lot offensively, and that they would be right back in the thick of the race as far as the Pacific Division goes in the Western Conference, and they certainly expected to be a playoff team. Well, here's what actually happened. The Kings finished the season 31-42-9 with 71 points, dead last in the Western Conference. They were absolutely abysmal at the start of the season. They were abysmal in the middle of the season, and they were abysmal at the end of the season. The Kings absolutely sucked all year long. They were one of the absolute worst teams in the league. Just an absolutely brutal season for LA. Their offense did not get better. Ilya Kovalchuk is a huge overpaid disappointment. Drew Doughty, as I talked about in number 9, was pretty bad. Jonathan Quick was injured for much of the year, and everything basically fell apart for the LA Kings this season, to the point now where I think that they're going to be horrible again next season, and it might be time to go into full rebuild mode for the Kings. But their 2018-19 season was absolutely a big, big oof. Speaking of big oofs, as this whole list is, number 7, Buffalo's second half collapse. Buffalo actually had a very good start to the last season, the 2018-19 season. And for much of the first half of the season, Buffalo held a playoff spot. They had a 10-game win streak early on in the year. I did a video about that if you want to go look back on that. They looked good. Jeff Skinner was lighting it up offensively. They had just brought in Carter Hutton to be the starting goaltender, and it looked like things might work out there. Their defense was playing better than it had in years past. And for much of the first half of the season, the Sabres held on to a wild card spot. They were in the playoff race. They looked like they could certainly be a playoff team. And they were outplaying a lot of their competition in that division. Most notably, I think their biggest competition for a playoff spot was Montreal and Florida. And Buffalo was the best out of those 3 teams for the first half of the year. And it really looked like the Sabres had a chance to end that long playoff drought and make it. And then the second half of the season happened, and the Sabres absolutely collapsed. Their star players weren't overperforming anymore. Their goaltending shit the bed. Their defense went back to the classic ineptitude we've seen from Buffalo's defense for the past 5 years. It was a brutal, brutal second half of the season for Buffalo, and they ended up finishing the season 33, 39, and 10 with 76 points, which was 22 points out of a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. So, I mean, their second half, I don't know their record from January on, but their second half of the season was absolutely horrendous and just completely rendered that first half, the great first half they had, completely meaningless, and they ended up over 20 points out of a playoff spot. Horrible second half for Buffalo. Big time oof. Number 6, the Edmonton Oilers season. We're back to our lovely friends in Edmonton who, oh God, once again, doing Edmonton things, falling flat on their face. So 3 years ago now, Edmonton makes the playoffs. Then they follow that up 2 years ago by missing the playoffs, which everyone expected them to be a playoff team. So then going into this past year, people were expecting a bounce-back season. Were they going to get any better? Were they going to figure things out? Well, no, they're not. They finished the season 35, 38, and 9, 79 points, second to last in the Western Conference. The only team out west worse than the Edmonton Oilers were the aforementioned LA Kings. What makes this even worse is that Edmonton wasted 2 100-point scorers in their forward group in Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Both had 100-point seasons. Didn't matter. Edmonton still sucked. Their goaltending is terrible. Their defense is awful. They have no secondary scoring. It's literally Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and that is it. And you cannot win in the NHL with 2 players, as Edmonton proved again this season. So another disastrous season for the Edmonton Oilers. They fired Peter Chiarelli finally. They fired Todd McClellan finally. But their replacements, I don't have all that much confidence in doing any better. And I think the disaster will continue in Edmonton next season, as they still don't have an answer at goaltender. Their defense still looks horrible, and they haven't really added any secondary scoring. So I don't know where the Oilers think they're going to get any better, but I don't think they are. So another big oof season for Edmonton. Number 5, my take on Tom Wilson's contract. Yes, rip me on this one, because before the season started, Tom Wilson signed a 6-year deal with the Washington Capitals at $5.17 million per year. And When he signed that contract, I did a video on it, absolutely trashing that deal. I thought it was way too long, way too much money for the guy they were getting. I did not think that Wilson had the offensive potential to live up to that kind of money. And basically, I was completely wrong. Wilson this season, in only 63 games played, had 22 goals, 18 assists for 40 points. His first time going over the 20-goal mark, his first time going over the 40-point mark. The offense continues to grow and get better from Tom Wilson. He still plays his hard, physical, power forward style. He still fights on a regular basis. He is a very physical, in-your-face power forward type player, which makes him worth, even more. He's also only 25 years old still, and now the offense is starting to come. I think he can certainly be a 25-goal scorer on a yearly basis. I think he can be a 40 to 50-point guy on a yearly basis, and if he does that while maintaining the physicality, he is without a doubt worth that contract at $5.17 million. So I was 100% wrong in my video at the beginning of the season. That could not have been a worse take on Tom Wilson's contract than the one that I had, because it absolutely looks like he is going to live up to it and be worth it. He had a great season this year, and I think, as long as he stays out of trouble suspension-wise, he'll be even better next season. So, big F in the chat from me on that one, because that was a brutally bad, big oof take by me. Number 4, John Tortorella guarantees a Game 6 win for Columbus. Yeah, we're going to talk about a couple of guarantees, this being the first one. This did not go well for John Tortorella. So, Game 5, second round, Boston versus Columbus. Boston wins the game on a David Pastrnak goal late in the third period. I believe there was about a minute and a half left in Game 5. On home ice, Pastrnak scores. The Bruins win Game 5 to take a 3-2 series lead. In the press conference after that game, John Tortorella guarantees that there will be a Game 7. He says, we will be back to Boston for Game 7, guaranteeing a Game 6 win, saying that Columbus will not lose this series on home ice. Okay, so we've got a guarantee now in the playoffs. Mark Messier did it. It went very well for the Rangers. John Tortorella does it. It does not go very well for the Blue Jackets. Boston goes into Columbus in Game 6, wins the game 3-0, winning the series in 6. Columbus didn't even score a goal in Game 6. And Boston goes on to the conference final, where they play and sweep Carolina, and then go on to the Stanley Cup, where they eventually lose to the Blues. But John Tortorella's guarantee, that was a big oof, because that did not go well at all, and Columbus did not win Game 6. They lost 3-0 on home ice to lose the series in front of their home crowd. Not good. Moving on to number 3, the Philadelphia Flyers' entire season. So 2 years ago, Philadelphia makes the playoffs. They lose in the first round to Pittsburgh, but hey, it's Philadelphia. Pittsburgh is a 2-3 matchup. Anyone can win. It's a hard-fought 6-game series. Philly goes into last year feeling pretty good about themselves, thinking they should at least be a playoff team again. Well, we got bad news for you, Philly, but your goaltending completely fell apart. Your defense was horrible, and Philadelphia finishes the season 37-37-8, 82 points, 16 points out of a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. Not even close to making the playoffs. They fire Dave Haxtell during the season. They fire Ron Hextall during the season. They don't get any solid goaltending until they call up Carter Hart, who by then it was already way too late. They were well out of playoff contention. Disastrous season for the Philadelphia Flyers. They're going to be looking to have a much better year next year. But this past year for Philly was absolutely a big oof, not what the Flyers or their fans were expecting. And we'll see if they can bounce back next season, or if they turn into the Edmonton Oilers of the Eastern Conference and have another disappointing year in and year out. Number 2, we're almost done as this video approaches 15 minutes. We are almost done, guys. Number 2 is our other guarantee. Bruce Boudreau guarantees the Wild make the playoffs. Back in February, the Wild were in the second wild card spot, barely hanging on to the playoffs. They were 27, 25, and 5 at that point, clinging to that last wild card spot in the Western Conference. And what does Bruce Boudreau say? The Wild's head coach, he says, I can tell you right now, this is a quote, I can tell you right now, I'm not Joe Namath, but we're going to make the playoffs, and we're going to be somebody hard to deal with. I'm making that prediction right now. End quote. So, Bruce, how'd the rest of the Wild season go? Well, I can tell you this, they didn't make the playoffs. They finished 37, 36, and 9, only one game above 500, 83 points, 7 points out of a playoff spot. Colorado was the second wild card team with 90 points. 83 was not going to cut it for the Wild. What's even worse is their last 10 games of the season, when they should have been fighting to possibly get into that last wild card spot. They went 3-6-1 in their final 10 games. Absolutely brutal. Disappointing end of the year for the Minnesota, who missed the playoffs for the first time in, I believe, 7 seasons this year. So, yeah, Bruce's February prediction of guaranteeing them that they're going to make the playoffs did not turn out too well. Somehow he still has a job. He was not fired this offseason, although I thought he should have been. But, yeah, no playoffs for Minnesota, and not a very good look for Bruce Boudreau. And finally, I think you all know what number 1 is because I haven't talked about it yet. I think it's pretty obvious what the biggest oof of this season was. The Tampa Bay Lightning getting swept in the first round. I obviously did a big video on this when it happened. You can go back and watch that if you want. Just if you just type in Tampa Bay loses or swept by Columbus, it should come right up on the channel. Yeah, Tampa Bay Lightning, President's Trophy winning team, 62 wins, record-tying, historic, incredibly good season for the Lightning in the regular season. They looked like an all-time NHL team, one of the greatest teams in history, just rolling through their opponents, tied the league record for most wins in a season. And they get swept out in the first round. They play the wild card team, the second wild card team in Columbus, who barely made the playoffs, and they get swept out in the first round. And what makes it even worse, they had a 3-0 lead in Game 1. They came out to a roaring start on home ice, had a 3-0 lead in Game 1 after the first period, and they blew that game and lost 4-3. Then they lost Game 2 on home ice. So then they were down 0-2, dropped both games on home ice, and had to go off to Columbus, where they lost both games in Columbus, completely shit the bed, ruined their entire season, swept out in the first round by a team that barely made the playoffs, only made it by 2 points, and completely wasted a 62-win season. This team that basically were the Golden State Warriors of the NHL. They were basically an all-star team with all the talent they had. Completely shit the bed in the playoffs. Didn't even win a game. And that is by far, to me, the biggest oof of this NHL season. I think this is one of, if not the biggest oofs in NHL history as far as a team in the playoffs go. Just completely wasted the entire season with a brutally bad playoff performance. So there you have it. The top 10 biggest oofs of the 2018-19 NHL season. There were some really bad times for some teams this year. Those are my top 10. Let me know if you guys think I missed anything, if something should have been on the list that wasn't. But those were the 10 biggest ones in my mind, and boy, there were some bad ones. Oilers hiring Ken Holland, Drew Doughty's minus 34, the LA Kings' entire season, Buffalo collapsing in the second half, the Edmonton's entire season, me thinking Tom Wilson's contract was absurd and terrible when it's clearly not. John Tortorella's Game 6 guarantee, the Philadelphia Flyers' entire season, Bruce Boudreau's guarantee, and Tampa Bay obviously getting swept out in the first round, brutally bad. So, that's what I've got for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. We are on our road to 1,000 subscribers, so please help us get there if you can. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.